Good evening, good evening, good evening, panelists and listeners. Oh man, what a week. Welcome to Waterhouse Vibes. I am Nita, your host. And with me today, I want to say we welcome the return of Sister Maxine. Welcome, Sister Maxine. You've been away for a little while. And
yes.
yeah.
Good to be back. I was actually on the ground in Waterhouse.
Glad to hear that. And we should talk about that, at some point.
Yeah.
Brother Lass, man, you push me, bro. I love that. Get up out of my laziness. And I hope as we go forward, we solve the problem, the infrequency and the disruption and all of that. Thank you for that, man. Patrick, you're always my sage, you and your friend, the other friend, from Weeko. Keep me up to date. John knows a man, knows a different man. He's a bald-headed brethren of mine, but I like to have him here, John, welcome.
Greetings.
Yeah. A herb. I think, this is the lady calling, Rosie. Yeah, I sent in an email to you.
Then I must look
yes,
for
yes.
Vibes.
I'm going. All right, hold on. Stay where you at. Let me have somebody send it to you. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that is Sister Rose is telling me that she can't find the email. Can one of you guys forward the email to her? The link, the invite? John, you have an email for her. Can you forward the invite to her?
Yeah, I'm looking.
So why do that? So it's not me alone with the problem. But while that, I'll continue.
No, Mike. Yeah.
You find it, John?
Give me the what's the email address? Don't call it out. Just put it in the private chat.
So while we start out the guests, we can continue, right? Yeah. Well, I was saying yes before the interruption. Well, I want to welcome everybody, and I want to tell you, I'm confident that we have gotten over the technical challenges that we experience. And I promise the listeners a much better organized broadcast. There's still some areas we still have to work on, like the time we start. We say 4 o'clock and more time we start later than 4 o'clock. So as we move forward in it, we work through that. Folks, this morning
was the thing you sent already?
Yeah,
no, I can't find it. The tab disappear. I don't know where it gone.
Oh man. This is a challenge right now, but we'll get the guests on. Yeah,
I sent it out Friday. No, Friday you sent it.
I don't see everything on it.
Her name not there, Ross.
I sent it. The email that I sent to you, right? Can you forward it to her, John? That's what I'm asking. All right, alas.
I can't send it to her unless I have her email. I don't have her email in front of me.
Hers is not there, Mikey. So you have to send it if you have it.
Rosalea Hamilton at gmail.com.
Shouldn't do that.
This doesn't look good, no? But you have that.
Somebody taking care of it?
Oh, we think you're doing it.
No,
I sent it.
You just send it? All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Rosalea Hamilton at gmail.
You're live now, you know. Don't send out our info like that.
Oh man. Yeah, we have to edit that when we get to that. But as I was saying before, the distraction. I was looking at this morning Sunday Gleaner, and I was like, man, life in Jamaica is very depressing.
What's happening?
Did you guys, you folks know of the killing of a police corporal this weekend?
Yeah, I read that.
You saw that?
Yeah.
In the same area also, the people them demonstrate over the youth that the police killing a Clarendon. The young man, they were accused of raping, or I'm saying responsible for the death of a 9-year-old girl. The police them went and killed that youth. And somehow it seemed like somebody organized, whether a politician or what have you, organized a demonstration in support of the police to kill that youth. In the exercise no rights there, nothing. Just kill him because he's accused of that. You know, and when I look at the Gleaner, it's like I start saying to myself, boy, we have become immune to the violence. You know.
But as we discussed last time in the Mikey, is that the anxiety that people have over this violence are gonna make them accept so many things.
I confirm when you say last week because
make them
demonstrations frighten a lot of people, man. Which way we are go?
You see, most.
Now the same young man that the police killed.
Yeah.
He committed either 4 or 5 other rapes, including trying to rape a 1-year-old baby.
Hold on, Mikey. Call and find out if the thing reached the person.
All right. Continue conversation.
Yeah. So,
Rosie? Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me go.
Sarah here.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
We're good. We're all good.
Yeah, man, I'm good.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So welcome. I'm trying. Yeah, Sister Rose, welcome. Finally get you on the panel. I don't know where to start now because you joined us at a point we were talking about the state of affairs in Jamaica. It seems like we get immune to it. But I think I should first introduce you to the listeners, and that is the proper way. If not, then I know I'm going to hear it from Jonathan. Why you should I do this or what have you. So, Rosalie Hamilton, former advisor to Portia Simpson, Prime Minister of Jamaica. Rose is also a trade specialist, among other things. And it seems like Rosie is keeping a lot of us on our toes when it comes to the Constitution and what have you. And we're going to hear from her about that. Yeah, a little bit. Let me share something with the listeners. I first met Rosie in 2007. And at that time, I was really impressed with her energy. You know, this warrior energy and what have you. And a certain individual introduced me to her, and I ever since that admiration is still there for Rosie because she's one of the few women who, well, I hope those listening, them don't get jealous or what have you. But in my view, Rosie is one of the few sisters who step out there without fear. And I think I know where that sort of passion come from because those of us who live in Walton Park Road area, we don't have our whole man. Last you might remember our whole man. Remember Hamilton Lumberyard?
Yes, yes.
Our father that,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the man who used to stop in front of the yard and there walk past. He's outside there. Our father that.
Yes.
You understand? That's where the spirit that come from. You understand? When we are youth, I come from Tarrant and I come down through Keys Avenue and then to get a water house. Yeah, listen, man, stop out there. So, never tell we say we can't walk passing yard. He just make a walk through, and go where I go. Mr. Hamilton. So, Rosie are good people. And this evening, I hope she will share with us and the listeners, our journey, where she come from. But more so, talk about what I think is a central question in Jamaica, the Senate, the role of the Senate in Jamaica. Should we keep it? What are the problems there? And if we remove it or reform it, what do we put in place? Because the Senate, Jamaican Senate, is an important institution. I say important because it kind of, sometimes when the MP them get hot up and whatever, the Senate kind of cool them down, So, Sister Rosie, I don't know if I say everything, but I don't want to let the puss out of the bag, So, you will have to say something to the people, tell them who we are, what the passion, and especially tell us about this reform. What is this thing about?
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me. And you've correctly located my roots on Bolton Park Road. My dad is part of that generation that refused to work on the plantation. In fact, just this morning I was recalling that the only job he had was a temporary job as a furniture maker up at UWI. And they wanted to keep him there. And him said, no, I'm going, strike out and them thing, because he didn't think he would make a lot of money just as an employee. So that fighting spirit to make life on your own terms is what I inherited from my father. And a lot of my economics and law comes from a deep understanding of what he and his generation was trying to do to make life on self-reliant terms. And that that's a very difficult road. That's the road that some of our ancestors took when the choice was, do I stay on the plantation? Yes, the pain are bad and the conditions are bad, but no, so every week I'm going to get a money. And I'm going to live in a house because you get a house, or you have living condition. You have some kind of a place to live. But a lot of our ancestors walked away, and the passion to walk away against the odds, no guarantee that you're going to make enough money every week to live, no guarantee that you can find a place to sleep. Those are serious risks you take when you stand on your own 2 feet and you try to make life on self-reliant terms. And that's the father I knew and I understood. And so my understanding of that economic journey of small businesses came out of that experience. That's why I spent so much of my time when I came back, having studied abroad, to help small businesses, because I know how tough that road is. And so, I've been doing that. And then, my understanding of the economic challenges had led to a deeper understanding of the governance arrangement that we need to be able to walk that path. You need a government to support us. And, it's a very simple idea in my head, because everybody understands that during the colonial era and the institution of slavery, we had laws that kept the system in place and enabled the exploitation of our labor, right? And the inhumanity that you saw. The laws did that, right? So, and we can trace that all the way back from, the papal bulls from the Spanish when Columbus came. He took the highest law of the land in Spain as the legal framework to commit the genocide that he did, right? So that's the story of law and economics. And so my training and my background is about understanding legal framework required to facilitate and enhance economic development. So that's basically my training and my background. And so I've brought that perspective in the discussions on constitutional reform, because for me, the cry of the Jamaican people as about whether constitution can eat is a very simple answer in my head. Yes, it can, if you know how to eat it, right? And the way to understand how constitution can enable us to lift our standard of living, to improve our economic well-being, is to understand the important role that people like my father play in the Jamaican economy. Self-reliant individuals who can find answers, innovate solutions against the odds. These are the entrepreneurs that we have to empower. That's the root of our music. And I see my sister, Maxine Stowe here, and Maxine understand that it's the musicians didn't try to play classical music better than the classics. They invented their own thing, and they went against the odds. Those days, early in the days when you would be criminalized just for playing that kind of music, right? And we know the society where, you can't be ambitious if you want to sing reggae music. You were discouraged as a youngster. So it is against those odds they pursued, and the rest is history. We now, as a nation, stand proud because we had the founders who were brave enough and bold enough to go on a self-reliant path to create a music that made sense of their reality. So that for me is the key. The key economic solution is to follow that path. Unfortunately, we have seen successive governments embark on another path, which is economic reliance on others. So we rely on them to bring, billions to the country to invest and so on. And yes, the investments are needed to facilitate what we are trying to do. That's where we want the economic investments to come to help us to do what we can do and that we are masters at. And the capital investment will help, right? Because none of us live in isolation in our world. We had to, buy equipment from overseas in the industry, etc., etc. So we need different self-reliant terms to engage the world. And what is happening right now under a new world being recreated by Donald Trump is forcing countries like Jamaica to stand up on self-reliant terms, because if not, you're going to continue to be in an environment where, if our neighbors catch a cold, we get pneumonia, right? And so we understand that for a long time, that's been our reality. But we know we have the capacity to create an economy and self-reliant terms. And so for me, the Constitution is about creating that framework in which our voices are heard, the voices of the innovators, the creators, the people who are choosing that self-reliant path. And that if they are supported by a legal framework, they have a fighting chance, they have a fair shot at doing things that not only benefit themselves, but ultimately benefit the society in the way that we've seen our musicians are able to do. Directly and indirectly, right? It is when we begin to do that, we begin to unleash that creative potential that exists in our society. And to support the real innovators who can transform what we have, make something out of nothing, turn them hand and make fashion, and engage the world on self-reliant terms. That, for me, is the challenge that we have. And I believe that if we think about the Constitution in those terms, then it becomes very clear to people who don't understand that, listen, what we really need, the real transformation that's required, the real constitutional reform that's required, is a legal framework that can empower our people and empower communities to strengthen their capacity to create the goods and services that can compete internationally on different terms. Boils down to that.
Maxine, I also see you as a warrior. See, I want to talk about, but I want to get back to what Rosie said. Rosie, all what you say is true. The unfortunate thing, when we are growing up, nobody not teach us about the Constitution. So here it is now. We're talking about constitutional reform, but that the why only rests with the intelligentsia in Jamaica. The people along there, the ghetto and them thing there. They're not think about no constitution. They not see the need for constitutional reform right now. So how you close that gap between what the intelligentsia recognize as necessary just now in Jamaica, and the ordinary people get to that spot yet? How you manage that gap?
Well, I think there are two things to note. What is happening now in the constitutional reform is one interpretation of what is required to move to a republic. And anybody can Google the definition of a republic, and there are two things that will turn up. One is a state, a government in which the monarchy has no place. A system of government without a monarchy or without a kind of ruling elite. Okay. And then you have the concept of a republic that turns on the sovereignty of a people. Right? And that is the concept that led other countries like America to pursue this idea of creating a government for the people, by the people, and of the people. All right. Now, that second conception of the republic is just thwarted. You don't hear much about it. The assumption is that under our quote unquote democratic system, I say quote unquote because it's not very democratic in its core expression. The idea is that, well, we have a representative democracy, and so it is a democracy for the people. So people kind of say, oh, we have it already. We don't. No, some people who understand knows that, well, we have it in the form, but it's not really like that, because when we see our representatives go to parliament, they are making decisions more in line with a political party than they are with the people they represent. So people understand that. So the question then is, if we have a flawed democracy, because the things that are supposed to happen are not happening, and if we want to move to another thing we call a republic, then the question is, where should our focus be? Should we focus on a king whose power and authority don't really affect the everyday lives of the Jamaican people? In fact, when I talk to Jamaicans, people will say, I don't really know much about the king. I don't really know anything about him, and I don't understand how him affect my life. And so for people who are focused on this idea that, colonialism dead, so we really shouldn't have this colonial legacy. We need to be independent, and so we need to complete that process. And we need to really decolonize our government system and get rid of the king and so on. They focus on that. That's the focus they have. And so the whole conversation is about moving the king. Now, my view is that the Jamaican people have gone past that long time. And the people who are here who may not want to change the system is because they don't trust what this other system is going to look like. It's not because they want to keep a king. Right? That's the understanding I have. I've spoken to a lot of people who say, boy, they don't want to change this thing, they don't really understand, they don't want to go this republic thing, they don't understand it, right? And that has more to do with the fact that they don't trust that the government is going to take them in a place that makes sense for them. I don't know anybody, and maybe there are a few, who want to keep the king, right? So the question is, what about that other part of this concept of a republic? Why are we not saying more about it? Why are we not identifying the provisions in the Constitution that helps us to embody and institutionalize the idea that the Jamaican people are sovereign? And that is where many of us who have been shouting, in fact, ever since the Prince came to Jamaica, Prince, the king's son came to Jamaica, and he, came at a time we were just coming out of COVID and stuff, and many of us, as part of the Advocates Network, demonstrated in front of the British High Commission and so on. And it was in that context the Prime Minister said, we're moving on. And, from we heard that, we're glad, because he's dying to see the back of the king. So we said, good move. But then what about this other thing? It can't just be a conversation about moving the king. And then remember, the Constitution Reform Committee said, well, let's phase it. So, okay, fair enough. It's a lot to do one time. So let's phase it. And somebody picked the first phase. Most of us never have nothing to do with what goes into what phase and so on. And so the question we had is, okay, even if you pick the first phase, we can go with this because we're dying to get rid of the king. But make us talk about where we're going. Because many countries have moved the monarch. We've seen it in Barbados and we see it in other countries. But they've not done much more. So this piece of getting our people sovereign, of shifting, creating a new governmental arrangement that really enables us to achieve what we want, this self-determination, this self-reliant development, and so on, we're not seeing it. So I can say that I am personally very skeptical of any government saying, okay, we'll do it down the road and don't tell us where we're going and not provide a perspective. And the first clue that we were right, that there is no other agenda other than moving the king, is when we saw the bill explicitly saying it will retain the parliamentary cabinet system. Now, there's a big debate about whether we should move from the parliamentary system to a presidential system, and we can talk about that. But I can tell you up front, I don't, and I think, quite frankly, Donald Trump is the best example, is telling us very clearly, if we look good, that the solution to the problem in our constitution is not a presidential system, because a presidential system can look like what Donald Trump is executing today. And the question everybody who wants a presidential system have to ask is, what are the mechanisms we're putting in place to ensure that we do not have a King Trump? We know the king we already have, you know. We are very clear about the authoritarian culture and character of our prime ministers. We've experienced it for 63 years. So my question is, if we're going president, how are we going to guarantee we're not going to end up like Trump? Remember, they took 250 years to get there. So we are all going to dead and left this problem, right? And the question is, will our children inherit a Jamaican Trump in the future?
We experience Eddie Siaga already.
Well, all right. So that's my point. So that's all I want to say for now, right? But I want to finish the point that the issue is, if we want to, the commissioner said they're retaining it. My position and the position of the group that we are advocating and kind of trying to coalesce ideas around is that, listen, there are flaws in the current system that we have to fix. Let's fix it, and then we can talk about whether we want to change the system or not. And those flaws have to do with the structure of government that concentrates power in the hands of our prime minister and our cabinet. And therefore, if you are planning to retain that, we're not in there with you. And that is the discussion we're having right now. The bill was tabled in December, and what basically it said, among many things, was we're retaining that system. And there's loud voices in Jamaica that is saying, listen, we don't like the system, we want to change it. And those voices are being ignored. How we change it is a discussion we have to have internally, because even those who want an elected president, some people are saying they want to elect a president who is not an executive president. So there's that version. And there are some people who want an elected president and they don't want the cabinet to be appointed. They want an elected president, they want an executive. So there are many variants to this idea that you want an elected. It's not a simple idea. And there are many different views about it. In the same way, there are many different views about a non-elected president and how that president would be appointed. However, last point I just want to make is that, for me, I think that the country and many people have made a big deal about elected versus so on and so on, and that is the focus of the discussion, and completely missing the bigger picture. Because the question cannot be the power of one man or woman. It has to be the entire structure of government that is required to achieve what our foreparents have fought for: self-determination, economic development, and a framework in which we can live with dignity as Black people in this country. That's our legacy. That's what they've been fighting for. That struggle has not died. We're still in the throes of it.
So are you saying?
So therefore, I'm just saying that that's the conversation we now have to have. What structure of government, and it includes what structure of local government we want. And this idea where the focus is on the president completely miss the important conversation that is going to deliver benefits to the people of Jamaica at the level of the communities, where people are trying, in all kinds of ways to turn them hand and make fashion. We need a local government arrangement that is going to empower those communities and strengthen those communities. And that those conversations are being thwarted by a preoccupation with one man or woman. And my view is that way of thinking about it is simply perpetuating the idea that the future of our country lies in the hands of one person. And I therefore encourage people to shift that focus. Let's think about the structure of government that can deliver all of what we want, and then we fit the president in there.
So are you saying that, well, in today's Gleaner, Mr. Robinson, columnist Mr. Robinson put forward a good, strong argument for the direct votes of senators and all of that. You think that he is wrong? It doesn't seem like you support the vote, one vote, one man. You think?
Yeah, but the idea is not simply one vote, one man. The idea is, what is that one vote, one man, one woman going to help us to achieve? And this is why I start with our history, because
accountability.
Sorry?
He thinks that by having the vote, direct election of these officers, the Senate and others, that sort of strengthen the accountability.
Well, I don't know if you quite get to accountability so easily. What it strengthens is representation.
Okay.
So I fully agree with the idea that we should put an end to an appointed Senate that really only rubber stamps and looks very much like what the lower house does.
Okay.
In its character and its form.
Okay.
So when this new bill says most of the senators will be appointed by the leader, the prime minister, right? I think it's 13, and 9 the opposition, and then they give the president 2, you still have a structure that favors the ruling party. And although there is a strong argument for independent thinkers, what does that mean? Even if you come up with independent thinking, right? Can it make a difference in a parliamentary arrangement that's dominated by the executive?
So what reforms are you proposing?
Yeah, well, I with respect to the Senate, I'm certainly agreeing that we need an elected Senate, but the question is for what? And the answer I give, and others who are part of this way of trying to think differently about the country, is that if we have senators representing parishes, for example, 2 senators or 3 senators per parish, then they could take on this very, very important part of our economic development, which is focusing on what we can think about as the spatial inequality that exists in our society. So that what we all understand is that most anything you want, you have to come to Kingston for it. Right? And if you want tourism, go to Montego Bay. And pretty much very little takes place in these other parishes that are comparable to what happens in Kingston and Montego Bay and St. Catherine. And that is why this whole discussion about Portmore and so on. And I want to suggest, and not suggest, I want to remind the audience that the majority, more than half of the MPs elected in the lower house come from those 3 parishes.
What?
Yes. And therefore, the decisions that come from the house will be shaped by the preoccupation of those parishes. So the rural parishes, for example, their voices can't really influence some of the conversations that are taking place. I want to make the point this way. A colleague of mine who is leading the fight, and I know he would mind me calling his name, Dr. Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor. Devon made the point this way. He says, listen, you Kingstonians look at Ocho Rios as your playground, because you leave Kingston on the holiday and you come to Ochi and you have a fantastic time on the beach. This is your playground. But for us who born and grow there, this is our backyard. So we see the problems very differently. You're not seeing the water problem, the road problem, all the issues, the lack of development in certain parts of Satan. You're not seeing that and you're not concerned about it. You are only concerned that certain parts of Satan set up such that Kingstonians can go there and have a great time, the tourists can come and have a great time, but the people who live there in those spaces that are underdeveloped are not paid attention to. So the suggestion is that we could think again about our Senate, give them real work. And the work is to help work with the MPs in these communities representing the constituents and so on within the parish to ensure that the budget, which is the most important law, right? The most important law that our MPs go to Parliament to make, right? This is not a law done by the minister alone, Minister of Finance, right? And it seems that way, because the truth be told, that the members of Parliament come and they hear about the budget when the budget is presented. A few of them would, of course, have the opportunity to be part of the internal discussions, blah, blah, blah. But the bulk of those decisions are not influenced by our representatives. And the opportunity, therefore, to ensure that each community and parish across Jamaica has a fair share of a development budget, which is really where the rubber hits the road. That's where this issue of law and economics because it is the budget law, the most important law in many ways, that is going to fund everything we want in the country, right? That that's their job. And if we can get our senators to ensure that a fair share of that budget is fairly, equitably distributed, right? So the education resources are spent such that the rural communities those children have a fair shot at a good education, right? Etc., etc. To the extent that we do that, then I think that we give real meaning to our Senate. We strengthen our representation as a people, because we're not just relying on the MPs. We're now saying, hey, senators, represent us, because that's what you're going to Parliament to do. Fundamentally, to make law and to represent our interests in the lawmaking process, right? And so if we can strengthen that, I fully agree we're likely to get better outcomes. But along with that, we have to make some other changes. It's not just any one thing that is going to get us the outcome that we want. We have to see how the different parts of the structure of Parliament is different to enable us to get different outcomes.
Folks, any feedback you have heard, Rosie? What say you? What any feedback? Any reaction?
My thing is, the more I listen to Rosalie, the more I understand what went wrong with the constitutional reform process. Because you raise, at the beginning, in your introduction, you raise the sentiment amongst a lot of working class, lower class people with the feeling, can constitutional reform be eaten? Can reform of the Senate be eaten? And what it shows is that the things that are necessary to bring the real changes, right, to the country, because it's not directly at their doorstep. It is not understood as being important to the things that they are currently struggling for, right? And as you talk, it becomes more concrete that, yes, this is the thing that is putting food on your plate or stopping you from actually accessing the services of the country and the things you're paying taxes for, right? Because a lot of people don't understand how the structure of government, because people tend to feel, okay, if I elect this politician, right, that's fine. He's concerned about this constituency, or this local government person is concerned about this division, but they don't see the connection to the bigger power structure in the country that can block or enable those people who they want to enable in the system. They don't see that connection. And I think that is where, I mean, some people say it's just this reform of the Senate is just an intelligentsia issue or an upper class issue, but it is everybody's issue. And where the Constitutional Reform Committee breakdown is being more seen is that it did not bring it, we weren't able to connect the dots to these people so that they can see what is it in the power structure that we need to move and change, right? Other than just talking about the king. Because a lot of people right across Jamaica, when you talk about the king, yes, they know about, yeah, we don't want a king, but they don't see the connection of the little pieces in the system that also needs to be changed, right, to facilitate them moving forward.
Can I wanted to ask you a question, Rosalie, because I read I'm not sure if it's the most recent, but certainly at the end of April, and you made a comment that the two main political parties had come to some consensus in respect to constitutional reform. The net effect of it was we don't need to go any further. We don't have to open the door or the facility to bring in the ordinary people into the process. Is that correct? Is that a fact that the PNP and JLP agreed before the bill was tabled that was an adequate process as of when it was done?
Well, again, it's something we can Google easily. About a month after the Constitutional Reform Committee was set up, a little more than a month, the minister came to the nation and announced that they had made a consensus. And in my writings, that's the consensus I refer to. And I remind us because the plea and advocacy to include the people of Jamaica for the first time in our history in this constitutional reform, I think was ignored up to that point. In fact, if you look carefully at the Constitutional Reform Committee document, you'll see very clearly as part of the terms of reference that their mandate was to undertake the most meaningful and comprehensive constitutional reform that the country has had post-independence. And I was very glad to see that. I must tell you, I was I was a little surprised, but I said, wow, you have to support this, right? And we are all gang-ho. In fact, our advocates network, within months of the committee was not yet established. We had invited her on the minister on a Zoom meeting, and we said, yeah, we're willing to work with you because this is important. So we were advocating. Let me give you the timeline. January 1st, 2022, the ministry was set up. I think the decision to move away took place, I think, 2021. But the ministry was set up. The Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was set up with that explicit responsibility to undertake this comprehensive reform, right? And so by about March or May of that year, the committee was formed. Once the ministry was established, committee was formed, and then it was a month or so after. So at that point, there was very little, if any, public consultation. Again, we can go back to the records. There may have been
No,
one.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not
No,
disputing you.
Yeah, I'm just kind of just saying that people don't have to take my word for it. So what happened is that once the announcement was made, the Jamaican people, and I have to say, I was a little surprised at the extent of public outcry that said, hey, what about us? Are you making consensus without us? Where are the conversations? Where are the meetings and so on? I said I'm surprised because there's this myth going around that Jamaican people are not interested in constitution. But that's not the experience I have when I talk to people. When I talk to Jamaicans, when I go to community meetings, I talk about the community problems and how they see a different legal framework can help them. That's the conversation I have. And immediately people understand the Constitution. I don't have to start with a president or, a Senate or anything. I just start with what is it that you want as a community? How are you trying to develop? And what if we put these arrangements in place to help you develop? Everybody understand? I said, if that's the Constitution, I want that. That's the feedback I've been getting. So I don't know how to engage these conversations. And I think that's part of the problem like Lass was pointing to. That if you don't frame the issues in a way that people can see the connection, they won't.
But I would like to say something, Rosalie. You have really said quite a bit, and quite frankly, I concur with a lot of what you have said, and it really points and answers the question, right? As to the more people understand, the greater their involvement, and the more their involvement is the better their understanding.
Yes.
Right. So, but I want to go back to, first of all, just the way in which you presented it, that we really were expecting more of a discussion on the Senate and the change of the Senate. Because I said danger in terms of trying to lump the change of the Senate with, or lump that discussion with the constitutional reform or the constitutional change, whichever it might be, right? And I say this because there's a bigger context for us to look at in terms of what change means, right? And in terms of in terms of understanding, really where we're going, right? Going back to the matter of the Senate, I don't think you spoke sufficiently on, first of all, the Senate itself, the role of the Senate, what it is, right? Who are the senators, right? How they come about and so on, right? You made certain suggestions in terms of some of the suggested changes, right? Like I think you said something like 2 senates per parish or something like that. But what that to me points to is that, and this is something which I already knew, right, is that the Constitution is real in many ways based on the US Constitution, right? It is not half as comprehensive as the US Constitution, but it is based pretty much on it. And in fact, most of the Western constitutions are based on it, right? The style of government, everything, right? Because that is really seen as the first constitution, right? So I wanted you to expand a little on that first of all, right? And then try to narrow the discussion more towards the Senate, because this is really where we can get better understanding of the ordinary person listening. Because it is too much to consume when they try to lump other issues in as well, like changes in reform in constitution and so on.
Rosie, before you go there, there's something you said in your opening statement, was that there are people who feel that their communities or districts, whatever, constituencies are underserved, that the national government, the MPs, are not doing a whole lot for them. So what have they discussed in terms of decentralized government to ensure equal treatment to all three parts of Jamaica, Cornwall, Middlesex, Surrey, right? The good doctor, I know he's been handling a lot of the beachfront issues and stuff like that. And those local issues go all the way to the central government in Kingston. But they're not serving the fishermen and the other folks who utilize the beaches and do different things at sea. You have 500 miles of beaches, and the people only have access to less than 3 miles. So the question is, have they seriously looked at the decentralization of government? All right. In other words, if you want the president to play a role, let him play the role and bring maybe the Senate under him, change the role of the Senate, but then have the government, the prime minister, and the MPs to look at the budget for each of the three counties and decentralize it to those governments, and have those governments make decisions about their own futures. They could divide it and move responsibilities around to be more effective, right? If you want your MPs to operate at the county level so that you have a more effective governance structure and people are seeing results, because this is pretty much what they're complaining about. They're not getting any results in their areas, and they want to see more results. So when you think about changing the role of the Senate or changing the way they operate in general, so that people can see more of their taxes, they can see more of the budget operating in their own areas. And that way, you don't have a local government that is severely underfunded and being politicized by the central government, by the main government.
And what's the question?
I asked a question in there. I said, how would you go about getting decentralization of government, right? How would you go about getting that in effect within the three counties and have the three counties operating in a decentralized fashion?
Okay, let me take that last and come back to Patrick's question. Well, I want to just slightly differ in terms of the importance of locating an elected Senate in the context of a restructured government. While I understand your point that it's a lot, you know, and if you don't really have a good grasp of the entire structure of government, then it seems like it's too much. But it is important because whether we are aware of it or not, all parts of the government are working hand in hand consistently. Let me give you just a particular example of that as it expressed itself recently. Some of you may know that the teachers have been upset about the latest piece of legislation that they've put on the table, the JTC Act bill that was placed in Parliament and will become law. And I say it confidently because in Section 69 of the Constitution, what the Cabinet wants will become law. There's no, the debates in the Parliament is procedural. Yes, they'll tweak it here and there, but and we see it. We've seen it with Portmore. We've seen it with all of these legislation. And then for the role of the Senate is designed to facilitate that. The Senate is not just there on its own. It is designed to not interrupt that dominance of the executive. We had time, we can go into the discussions from 1961, where the dialogue within the Legislative Council contemplated the power in the hands of the Prime Minister. And those records told us very clearly that it was a deliberate design to concentrate power in the hands of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, with no adequate oversight and supervision in the hands of the legislature. And so Cabinet dominates the legislative process, and in so doing, not only makes the law, but executes the law. And that's why I made the point about, you know, when we think about our democracy, we're functioning at the core closer to a dictatorship or a kind of monarchical kind of expression of power than a democracy, because our voices are not heard. So that's the first reason I support an elected Senate, because it strengthens the representation of our people in the lawmaking process. And that comes to the heart of what you want in a democracy. You want our representatives to represent your will in law, because it is the rules that ultimately guide what we get in the society. All right. So having said that, I will focus on the Senate and make the point that the important point that you raised, which is what is that role of the Senate? Why do we want a Senate? So a little bit of history, and I'll come answer that. The history is the Senate was set up by the governors to essentially have his friends and the ruling, the plantation class and so on, guide him on the decisions about the lawmaking process. Right? That's what it was. It was an appointment. It's just again a design of how best to run the country. So that's what we inherited. And so the question is, is it that we want to continue this tradition of what the senators as a kind of upper chamber of advice that, you know, is where you wade in when you go through the lawmaking process? And we can see that the structure facilitates that. So my own view is that if we're talking about thinking again about the Senate, you're right, we have to think about that role and responsibility. And there are at least 5 things that I think the Senate should do. The first, of course, is to be part of that legislative function of Parliament. They are part of the lawmaking process. We have 2 chambers. You should note that most countries in the world, certainly most democracies, we can discuss how you define a democracy, a democratic country, but Freedom House has a criteria, and they identify a set of countries. I think it's about 82 or there around democracies in the world. And what they've pointed out is that most of those democracies, right, have unicameral systems, right? They only have one chamber. They don't have two chambers. So I want to put that in the context of the conversation as well, that they are less than half of the so-called democracies in the world have two chambers. And of those that have two chambers, most of them are elected. So this idea that you want an elected Senate makes sense for representational reasons. And so I fully support that. But I want to talk about the other function. So you're doing the legislative function. There is an important role that a Senate should play with respect to that oversight of the executive function. And that is, for me, one of the major flaws in this entire system, that you have the power concentrated in cabinet and the prime minister. They dominate the legislative process in terms of how the law is being made. And it's done in a way that kind of silences the voices of our representatives. Our representatives can't speak up. When last have you heard any member of the ruling party, backbencher, or somebody who's not in cabinet say, listen, I'm not so sure I am going along with this because my people in my constituency have a problem with that you're trying to put on the table? When last have we heard that? So the whole way the legislature functions is just consistent with that. So the oversight that's required through oversight committees that are designed as such. There's a conversation I'm currently had recently, just yesterday, about whether these sessional committees of parliament are in fact oversight committees. Now we can, even if you argue that they are, we can agree that they are not working. The effective oversight that will ensure that our country will not wake up again and hear that there's $3 trillion unaccounted for, right, has to come to an end. Because if you're not doing proper oversight and catching the problem on an annual basis, then it's going to accumulate. And then, we all hold our heads and bawl and say, what? But the proper scrutiny that's required from every ministry and agency of government to ensure that the executive is doing its job is not being properly done. All right? So that is another reason you want a Senate to help with that function, because it's an awesome responsibility. The modern society has grown bigger in terms of its executive function because we demand so much more from our government. And so we need now an empowered, strengthened legislature, two houses with representatives of the people providing oversight. So that's the second thing. Now, the third issue.
Can I stop? Am I to understand? I just want to be clear. What you're outlining here are the things that you feel should be in place.
In a Senate.
Among the many things, because that was a question I had. What we can't,
the role of the Senate.
We can't debate the whole of everything, but in terms of, you have been studying the issue, you have gotten a significant amount of feedback, and you also have a good knowledge of how the system works. So what are the things that you feel are necessary to make this system more in line with what you are in favor of, which is what we are in favor of, where the people can have more control, more accountability, more empowerment, etc.
And if you want me to focus on the Senate, I am actually explaining why the Senate, an elected Senate, helps with that. Because, all right, I know Patrick don't want me to do the big picture, but I'm going to move quickly from the big picture to the Senate. Here's the big picture. You need a structure of government that can help us. It's flawed in two ways, dominantly. Many other ways, but we can cut to the chase on two things that are important. The first I've been talking about, the strong, centralized, top-down approach to governance, concentration of power. Everybody understands that problem. That's one. And the second one is there's not enough mechanisms for our voices to be heard. And we know that because it was never designed, that our constitution was never designed to give us a voice, right? The only time we changed our inherited constitution, which we continued out of the colonial process, pretty much intact, right? With the changes with respect to the power of the cabinet, was when we changed the rules in 2011 with respect to the rights and freedoms of our people. So if we think about those two things, we can ask ourselves, how does the Senate help us to achieve these two things? And that's the way I think about it.
Absolutely.
One,
Absolutely.
by improving the representation of the people, we improve our voices. And you can get that through an elected Senate, right? With respect to the concentration of power, the elected Senate will help us with that, because the elected Senate can help in the responsibility of oversight of the executive. You can't ask unelected people to do that. Think about that, right? You can't ask the current senators that are appointed to provide oversight over the people's representative. So you need the people's representative to say, hey, as part of our job to make law and execute the law, some of you are doing the execution, some of us need to focus on the law thing, and our oversight of what you do when you execute the law, we all agree to, is key. So that's why the second function is there. Linked to that is to strengthen our voice in these conversations right there in the oversight committee, right? We want mechanisms so that we can get involved in that oversight. We can share information. Very, very important. Because one of the key things in the oversight process is that people, the senators, can hear about how these laws are manifested, how they play out, how they effectively operate in communities up and down the country. So a law that may work for Kingston may not work for people out in Prattville, Manchester, right? So therefore, the people of Prattville need to say, hey, you see this law that's going to put it in place? This is the impact it is having. And we suggest that you can do this differently and we will be better off. Those are the kinds of conversations we want to make. So I think the senators can help us with that, because we have another level of hearings that are organized, framework in which we can petition the Senate and say, Senator, listen, here is the problem. You want to help us, but this is not happening, right? So that's another. So that's a third reason. A fourth reason is really where you can see, and this is an area that some people have difficulty with, because perhaps they don't come to it with the kind of understanding of what is required to facilitate economic development, which is that the senators weighed in, right? They are concerned, put in their hands the protection of these underdevelopment, and if you like, you can talk about it as minority rights, you can talk about it as equal status and of opportunities in the parishes, tackling this problem that we have of the underdevelopment in places and spaces up and down our society. Now, I don't want to go off too much on why that is important from an economic development perspective. Because when we think about economic development, we think about like big things like tourism or even music or entertainment and so on. These are big things that all of us can do. But the reality is they happen in places and spaces in our country and not in the same way.
Rosalie, could you just pause a moment and have everybody mute themselves, because there's some feedback going on as well. So everybody should really mute themselves.
Right. All right. So that what we're trying to do now with this Senate, and this is This is an important part of the conversation for me as an economist, because I am preoccupied with how to foster the creative potential of our people so that we can create goods and services that can compete in the international market to generate the foreign exchange we need to deal with the problem that we've inherited, which is that we are a high import dependent country. And that means you have to earn foreign exchange. And that is the power of our music industry. Because we didn't just make it for local consumption, we took it to the world. Musicians took it to the world, and we can earn in US dollars. And that will matter for the growth of our country. If we put more and more goods and services, especially services, because the more we do these services, the more we don't have to deal with no tariff barrier, right? Right? We just need to get, and we have all kind of internet and stuff that will help us. We need to get that. So it is in that context for me, giving senators the work to make sure that there's enough resources going to the places and spaces in our country that can unleash the creative potential to give us a fighting shot in the globally competitive.
Well, we have some background noise. I don't know whose mic it is. Sound like a dog or...
Other than me, I don't have no dog. It's only you, Michael. Your mic is open.
Yeah,
it's not, yeah, something. Go ahead.
Michael, mute your mic and see. Maybe you're picking up, so I don't know. All right, so I don't know if you follow that point then. So that's, and then lastly, I'll just make the last point. The last thing for the Senate now is you want also a Senate to wade in on these important appointments. And that includes the appointment of your president. Sorry. So I know Maxine wanted to jump in here, so.
Yes. Well, in assessing what you are putting forward, a couple things come to mind in relation to, I kept thinking that the election of the senators, because it's so hard to bring a third party in, that has been tried over the years to expand the context or challenge the status quo that has developed. If the process of election of senators would also expand the framework that just exists now, within the MPs and the cabinet and so forth. I was interested to know, or to, what was forming in my mind, like, yes, get some other type of people elected, or another layer of electability in order to expand the framework that's there now. That, people want to say, get a third party in, because this thing is just like ping pong, and
Right.
and it is not allowing for that elasticity, that ability to move the agenda of the people forward, like we've gotten stuck in a rut. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking about the parishes is our diaspora. And what I have experienced myself, being a product of this diaspora, but with a product that is created here in Jamaica, and understanding how what we create in Jamaica, how in particular our diaspora as an economic, as part of our ecosystem, how it influences the economics here in Jamaica, practically, not through remittance, but very integrated into how what we develop here is marketed externally, which is our external market is so important. So in speaking about the Constitution and the identity formation of, the Jamaica, what do you call it, governance framework, 60 years later, we have a substantial amount of our population that is migrated and migratory, possibly going forward in the future. I don't know with the Trump thing. I know there's illegal issues in terms of illegal migration, but the legal migration that occurs, and how we are able to deal with that, even in planning for our economics, because I just don't see how, with such a vibrant diaspora that's transmitting and transferring our products and services, if this is not integrated into how we think. I look at the nascent ganja industry as a, how you call it, as a template to what we cannot do, or cannot think local about a product anymore, because so much of even what we own as Jamaicans is expanded or owned by our diaspora. So I'm questioning in your, even when you spoke about the rural parishes versus Kingston and Montego Bay, I mean St. James, Montego Bay, and Portmore, St. Catherine. If that reality isn't also the rural to urban drift, where the majority of the population, that's what I kept thinking, like, okay, so if there are X million people in Jamaica, those three spaces that you spoke about, where the power base politically, etc., comes from, is also where the economics, the how the economics of Jamaica is set, so that it's a bit unwieldy to say that you're going to distribute power when the economics is driving, the power, the way that the economics or the industrialization or whatever is going on is driving the populations into these three places, and the power structure is there. So I just had a question about that, the diaspora, and yes, the electability of the Senate would be a necessary or an advance just to get us, able to bring some other parties in or some other minds in, other than, what we currently have.
Right. All right. So a couple of things on the other parties, and I think it's a legitimate concern that a lot of people have, because the conception of the parties that we have is what we've known since independence, and it's not been a great story. And so people think, boy, you're just going to have more of that. I come back to why, Patrick, I think we need to look at the thing as a whole, because the reason you have the parties, both in terms of their design and structure, if you look good, and the gravitation and the fight, the intensity of the fight, is about the power. It's about the power. Now, if you don't concentrate power, if we design a structure of power, of government where you decentralize much more than we have now, and the power is not concentrated in that simple way, and there is effective oversight, and where we're shifting power from is not just the hands of the executive, but our representatives, who right now are kind of muted. if you shift that, then I think the dynamics changes. That's one point. The character of the parties will change. And let me tell you where I think you're beginning to see elements of the changes. Do you notice on both sides of the political fence in the recent run-up now to the election, how many people in the party are upset when the party hierarchy impose a candidate on them? You noticing it? Right. Never used to see it before. But that for me is the people of Jamaica, the activists who are in the political party say, no, no, no. You see this domination? You see this concentration of power where you can simply come and you are crying. Remember, what the parties are doing is imposing a representative on the people. So it starts right there. You can't get real representation when the people who are supposed to represent you are told by a set of people, this is the people that you have to vote with, and they'll put up 2 and 3 candidates, right?
So if that is the reasoning, Rosie.
Only point here, I don't want to go off and finish.
Yeah, make her finish.
Yeah.
And I have something further to say on that.
Because so Maxine, the point is, one, the power dynamics changes, so the character of the parties are likely to change. 1, 2, you can get third parties and other parties because now, for the first time, we're seeing this new creature called an elected senator. So now we can say, listen, we're going to focus our attention not on winning seats, kind of in the way we've been trying to win seats, but let us now organize and go after these senators. So you can. No, and I say that because the obligation to create a credible third party is in the hands of all of us. But that will never happen if we continue to see politics as dirty. And most of us with the capacity to shape political parties and organize and so on, stay away from the process, you will perpetuate it. Whether you put a proportional representational system in place or not, right? Because it ultimately will require the people to say, we want other voices, we're going to organize it at our community level and so on. So I suggest that an elected senator gives us now another chance to rethink how we engage our politics, and we can get other parties actively involved. Other point you made about the diaspora, have 2 points there. So the diaspora has become emerged out of the same reasons that we see this rural-urban drift that you point to. And that is fundamentally that people in the communities that they born and grow in can't quite see their way. The opportunities for growth and development and so on is limited. Some people leave because, boy, you really want to achieve certain things that you can't see. There's no framework to do it. If you look at the most impoverished countries in the community and you look at the data, you see that a big part of that poverty is the absence of the kind of assets that you need to develop as wholesome human beings. Educational assets are not there. The health facilities are not there. Not to mention the infrastructure, etc. Right? Housing conditions, poor, and so on. So people leave those rural communities to the towns for jobs, for opportunities to lift their standard of living and become better off. And that is the same reason fundamentally people have left and gone away. So my point is, when you begin to fix that, and now is the time to fix it, couple. I never know I'd live to see the day when diaspora people want to come home. Right? Because everybody leave because there are so much problems here, right? So we're in a world now where, boy, people want to come home. So we need to create we need to solve some of those problems so that the scale of people leaving. Remember, all the data tell us is well over 50% of our graduates, our tertiary educated people leave the country. So if we want to keep them here to get into the job of developing our society, we have to fix those problems. And I'm suggesting, therefore, that the role of the Senate is important in ensuring that there's adequate resources available, the opportunity for those spaces that are being underdeveloped, they get a fair shot, right? They get a fair share of the resources, that they don't all concentrate in Kingston or Montego Bay, right? But that enough of our tax dollars get shared in a fair and equitable way, such that they are real, it can improve the odds of developing those parts of the country that are underdeveloped, and that will help with the retention of the diaspora. And let me lastly say this, that, and that comes to John's point about the communities and how we develop the counties. I think you were talking, was it Herb, about the counties and so on, is that we have to rethink local government, right? And if you put enough power in the hands of local government and the communities, so we're talking about, for example, community rights, so that the people in the communities share, and the localities and the senator sharing the responsibility to find these solutions to improve the standard of living in people in those communities, I suggest that the diaspora will be very interested in that arrangement. Because I know a man like Michael, not interested in the whole of Kingston and St. Andrew. He really only interested in Waterhouse. And I suspect the same is true for John and most of you here who come from that community.
No.
Community you want to help. You're not interested in helping the whole of Kingston. Or the whole of St. Andrew.
No, you got that part wrong, but we'll excuse you for the time being.
Yeah.
Well, I suspect that many, and I'll tell you why I say that, John. Many diasporans, I mean, I do a lot of work with diaspora people, as you know, in the work that I do, right? And most times the diaspora is interested in helping the communities they're from. It's not that anything is bad with that, And it's not that they don't care about the rest of the society. I'm not suggesting that in any way. I'm saying that the first priority is, how can I give back to the community that
they're all interconnected. So it
absolutely
can't be solved. One can't solve without the other.
And that is the same, Patrick.
I don't want to cut you down.
The structure of government with only looking at one part. I agree with
you. John, before you ask.
No. I wanted to know if you were finished, because you've been you're finished because you kind of said you were talking about the Senate, but you had some other points that I'm focusing on, rather than talk about everything, is what are the things that you see that would make the kind of changes that we both agree is necessary. And
yes,
the Senate.
Yeah.
And also I have a question. What authority will the Senate have to be able to do this? I mean, I can just see that in a Jamaica, even if you had your type of Senate in place, which is elected, it can't supersede the president.
Well, again, you see, this is exactly why this is an important conversation and has to be seen in context. Because if you want a strong president, then you are creating the seeds of what will eventually become a Trump. The story of an executive is not a new one, The history of democracies and the history of civilization is the fight against a strong executive. Look good. Why? Because you have to give an executive enough power to run the society. Let me say this. In the conversations in the 1700s, when America was trying to set up their democracy and their republic, right? That was the debate, They didn't want to recreate a king because they're coming from under the clutches of a king, right? In Britain at the time. And they wanted to give enough power to the executive, the president. And the debate was, how do we give enough power to a president without creating a king? It is no accident that you hear the discussion in America now about King Trump, because many of them understand that history. and they moved away from a king. So I am very concerned about any idea that we are going to reconcentrate power in the hands of a president.
But Rosemary, I think you misunderstand what I said earlier on, right? And that's why we keep having the discussion, in a spiral, because it came up again with what Maxine, the questions Maxine asked, right? And again, what John raised, right? Because some of these things you spoke to it, but what I'm saying is that when you speak broadly and include everything, right?
It's hard to follow. I agree.
Exactly.
I agree.
And the thing is that they tend to lose the point you make in terms of the importance of the Senate.
Yes.
Right? In a new way.
Yes.
Right? Because change is really where resistance comes.
Right.
People are resistant to change.
Right.
Because change they have no clue about.
Yes.
And when they already have a misunderstanding, right, it makes it that much more difficult.
Yes.
Right? To discuss change with them.
Right.
That's the point. Right?
Fair enough. I accept the point, Patrick. The only point I was making though is it's not so simple to just cut out the slides. So that's why for example, when I was talking about the role and function of the Senate, I had to bring in the executive. You see what I'm saying? So I take your point though, that sometimes it's easier just to follow because there are so many moving parts.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rose, let me ask you this. You said the reform of the Senate is empowerment, talking about power, right? That's what you said. Now, the Jamaican woman is one of the most oppressed group in our society. Yet, neither you nor Maxine is calling for this woman to be strengthened in the Senate. For example, a set amount of Senate seats set aside for women representatives. Is that something along those lines you're going, the reform of the Senate?
There are lots of details with respect to how the Senate would be constructed, and therefore in that context, I absolutely agree with you that approach makes sense if the country wants more. I say if, because we talk about it and, we have seen and I have to give credit where credit is due. The current structure of government has an unprecedented amount of women. Having said that, the issue is not simply the number of women in parliament, again, because we're seeing unprecedented numbers. The question is the framework in which they're going to function. Because if women, for example, were to caucus and put a gender policy on the table, that has to do with the concerns of women and children and so on. And the men in cabinet, and let me just say, even if the women are the majority in cabinet, but you may have, say, a male prime minister, the power of that prime minister is what is going to call the shots. Let's be very clear. Let me just say,
under the present structure.
It is. We saw what happened with George Wright. Where was the loud voice of the women in parliament questioning whether it was he who was in that video? We didn't hear that loud voice. We heard concerns, but it was muted. So what I'm saying is,
Rose,
and everybody just follow the party line on that score.
But there are two other pieces to that as well.
Let me say this, Pat. Let me say this. What Rosie just touched on is the corruption of the women in the parliament. They are so ingrained in what the men want and how the men defend the integrity of their individual parties. They were afraid to speak up.
Well, I want to be careful not to construe what I say. Hold on, I want to be careful. I don't want to construe what I just said as supporting the idea that the women are corrupt. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply saying that whether men women. I mean, there's a push now to have more people with disabilities and so on. All of that, those voices will be crushed by a strong executive that continues and perpetuates the status quo.
But what I wanted to say from earlier.
One second, last.
No, I wanted to say something from early.
I don't want to leave that point there.
Patrick, last been waiting for some time. Go ahead, last.
I wanted to say something from early, but my mic was off. I didn't even realize it. When you raise the thing about talking about the bigger picture versus the Senate alone, the issue is for me is that when you look at the executive, you realize how the power is like compounded, because the executive, they're coming from the legislative branch and they're making the policies and the laws and whatever, and they are also in the cabinet, right, which carrying out another set of decisions based on what was done and at the legislative, in the legislative area. So it's like, even with the issue about the women that Herb raised, it's like this compounding of power dictates, these guys are here to dictate who does what and who have power and who don't have power, right? So they can sanction whoever they want, they can silence whoever they want, because the power is so compounded as you go up the ladder, right? So that is also a reason why it's so difficult to separate talking about the Senate as against talking about the overall constitutional reform process. It becomes much more clear to me what went wrong and what really threw the constitutional reform process off the rails, because it was doomed from the beginning. Because a lot of people not tuning into how the power is connected, and if you don't try to dismantle these things, it don't even make sense to talk about constitutional reform.
Hey, no. Here's the thing. I clearly take Lass's point, right? But again, it comes back to understanding, right? If we're discussing about the Senate, right? It's not gonna be an exclusive discussion about the Senate, but we can't get into a discussion as well on the comprehensive constitution, right? Because what happens is that the discussion of the Senate is gonna expose certain things about the Constitution, right? From the Senate perspective. Yeah. And this is really what we gotta do, because the whole discussion around the Constitution is so comprehensive that we're gonna have to deal with it section by section by section. And it starts out with the fact that in many ways there's a big misconception as to what the Constitution really is, or what it's supposed to be. Just like there is one where what the Senate is and what it's supposed to be, right? Now, Rosalea has articulated quite well, right, what the Constitution is. I mean, what the Senate is and all of that. Yet we still have questions coming up because of the constitutional angles that was involved, right? And this is what I was really speaking to, right? And on the matter of the woman, the point Mike raised, right? I would want to say that it's not something mechanical. It's not just a matter of the numbers, right? The woman that you're talking about becoming, rising to this level in office, right? Or this level in representation, or this level in serving, right? It really has to be driven by real consciousness and not by numbers.
And that's true for the men. Absolutely.
And it is true for the men as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it is not a matter of men versus woman or woman versus men, right? It is not a gender thing. We argue this way because this is how we have been trained, right? We grew up in a segregated society, right? That is what this whole thing is about. Capitalism is about segregation.
Right. And of course, part of that segregation, unfortunately, is the gender, and that even when, and I mean, we see it right now in the data that women have increasingly attained more educational status, yet the data continues to tell us that they're being paid less. So there are gender issues that you have to tackle. But I think the point again, everything interconnected. You can solve it with just numbers, but then there is a bigger set of interrelated issues like the power they have, as you said, what they bring to the table, etc.
And what concerns me though is that if the Senate is supposed to be the body that approves or substantiates changes to the Constitution, it complicates the entire process. It's like what you try to dismantle first, what you try to get in place first, and how to get the reform of the Senate going hand in hand with the overall reform of the Constitution. That's a concern for me.
Yeah.
Let me expand on what I was saying earlier also, Rosie.
All right.
Our problem today in governance is impacted by that unitary executive who is directing government and government actions, and who has more than taken his and her fair share of government, whether it is through contracting and through other methodologies, which of course our Integrity Commission has been looking into. How do you propose, even though you may make these changes to the Senate or to any other body of government, how do you propose to control the corruption?
Yeah.
Corruption is what kills programs. It kills programs on the private side as well as the public government side. So if we can't control it now, how do we propose to control it with the changes we're making?
Well, I think a big part of it is about the structures that we put in place in Parliament with respect to strengthening the capacity for oversight. You see, it is that scrutiny that is important. And it's not just the scrutiny of the legislators themselves, but the rights that we have to bring the information and the knowledge we have about those problems to bear in Parliament. And that's the power of legislative hearings and, our right to petition and so on, so that our eyes and our ears are part of that oversight. And it's important to kind of see it as a way in which we gather the critical information we need to understand how our laws are being executed, right? Because it is that information that the legislators need to say, listen, you see this thing not working for those people down in Prattville, we have to change it. And we may have to change the entire law because we're hearing it from Prattville, we're hearing it from this community and so on, right? And so they said, okay, we hear from you. No, we have. And I have to say that when we talk about legislators and people in government, we're talking about ourselves. We're talking about ourselves, because any one of us could be there if we chose to, and if we actively engaged and so the people who are there are not unlike us, who want the best for the country, but perhaps the same limitations we have in trying to understand our constitution and understand all these things, they have too, and so we have to this is why what you're doing is so important. And Michael, I have to tell you, I have to run because I've stayed much longer than the 1 hour you tell me, right? But when we engage these kinds of conversation, we all learn. I learn. I'm not somebody who have exhausted. I use every opportunity to say to people, I haven't studied the Constitution, haven't taught the Constitution. I'm still learning about the Constitution. My knowledge is not stopped. And I don't go to conversations thinking I know any more than anybody else. Because this, if you really understand it, is about our lives, what we want, how we want to live, how we want to coexist in this place called Jamaica. So every voice matters.
Excellent.
And we have to listen carefully to each other.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And just to tweak your point a little bit more, right? I'd want to say that, you know, the Constitution itself is never a final document.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? So it's not about perfection.
And therefore, we ought not to create enemies when we differ on a point, right?
Yes.
Because we all, I mean, you know, all of us want the same thing, you know, we want the best for Jamaica. All are we proud of Jamaica, right? We don't think there's
No,
right? We all
me not think,
have just different ways to get there.
yeah, but me not think me and Oldness share the same thing though.
Well, I want to suggest that anybody who stand up for office want the best for the country. The difference you have with the prime minister is how, you know, and I'm saying since
trust me, Rose, it much deep. It is much
all right,
deeper than.
I won't get into that. But what I want to say about last point, very profound point he made, that, you know, you're saying, listen, you know, we never get everything that we want. I think Patrick was just making it a different way. We're not going to get everything we want in this Constitution, right? So we have to coexist with our differences. And I think having said that, we ought to understand that when you insist on a point, you know, sometimes it's how you say it, but when you look good, it's not so different from yours. And therefore, we can say, all right, you may see it a different way. I see it a little different way. Make we go along. Because we know that in the end game, in the final analysis, that bill to change our Constitution, we will never agree with everything. And that's why I want to end this by saying, and I gave you the link, Michael, and I will ask you to put it in the chat for those who have been listening to join us on this road. A lot of what I've said is embodied in our document. We know that everybody don't agree with every single thing. And we say, if you agree with most of it, tell us. Because we're trying to find people who want to engage these discussions on an ongoing basis. We have online discussions that we do regularly now. And we're also going into communities, talking to communities. And we're trying to just engage the society. And we're doing it in a way where we're sharing, learning from each other, and trying to build the kind of consensus that's required to get to that destination at some point. And I think we ought not to sit back and wait for the government to do it. We all have to do it.
And on that note, I want to thank you, Rosie, for a very informative discussion.
Thanks.
I hope you listeners out there, you have learned something. You know, we don't know everything, but we share what we hear with you. You know, so you couldn't want to hear from a much better person than Professor Rosalea Hamilton.
For you, it's Rosalie, you know that, right? In its form, this is not about professorship. This is about me and you, brother and sister. I try to do the same thing. So Rosalie, good.
Rosie, how come you have to you just do me that? So. Yeah, let the push out
well appreciated,
Professor.
Well appreciated. Well appreciated.
Yes, very much so. And I want to ask the listeners, you know, that you hear this kind of discussion, and it's about now you start like up this page, you know. Please, we need to get to 5,000. Last week we had 2,000 listeners, and we're moving, okay? So I'm begging you, like and share. Tell your friend about this platform, Waterhouse Vibes, where we enjoy and entertain clean conversation, no cuss or conflict or flight. Okay. So until next week, I want to thank everyone again. Thank John Horton, Herb Nelson, Patrick McCarthy, Les Crawford, Maxine, and Rosalie Hamilton. Thank you all, guys, and we'll be in touch. Can I ask the panelists to stay back for a few minutes?
All right, and I want to thank you, Michael, and thank the panel for a robust discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for your comments. Thank you to the listeners who've been commenting. And I have sent the link to both you, John, and Michael, to put in the chat, share with the audience, and have them see the document that was created so that they can join our efforts, if they so choose. All right?
Blessings.
So much.
Blessings.
All the best. Thank you.